The book of Ecclesiastes says there is a time for everything under the sun. A time to live and a time to die. A time to laugh and a time to cry. A time to dance and a time to mourn. Well, Holy Week is definitely a week for getting in touch with those darker, more painful experiences of what it means to be a human being. Experiences that every single one of us go through. Experiences that Jesus himself went through. Holy Week is a time to walk with Jesus on that journey of the cross and to trust that God is walking with us in our own suffering and pain. And Lord knows there's a lot of that to go around right now. I've heard from a number of our parishioners who have lost jobs and are just worried about how they're going to make it through the next couple weeks and months. It's a time not to run away from that pain, but to dig into it a little bit. It's a time to trust that we have to die in order to live. If there's one promise of our faith, it is that we have to go through the cross in order to get to the resurrection. And so with that in mind, let's dig into the gospel for the day, Monday of Holy Week. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. John. 6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. They gave a dinner for him there, and Martha served, while Lazarus was one of those reclining at table with him. Mary took a liter of costly perfumed oil made from genuine aromatic nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus and dried them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. Then Judas the Iscariot, one of his disciples and the one who would betray him, said, "Why was this oil not sold for 300 days' wages and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief and held the money bag and used to steal the contributions. So Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Let her keep this for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The large crowd of the Jews found out that he was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, who had been raised from the dead. And the chief priests plotted to kill Lazarus too, because many of the Jews were turning away and believing in Jesus because of him. The Gospel of the Lord. So in today's reading, Jesus is making his way from his hometown in Galilee up into Jerusalem for the Passover feast. You know, Passover was and is one of the major holidays for the Jewish people, and Jesus was a devout Jew, so he's going to the temple in Jerusalem to celebrate the feast. But he also knows that the heat has been turned up in Jerusalem, right? The religious authorities are out to get him. His life is very much in danger, and he knows that. So he stops in this little suburb of Jerusalem on the way in, where his besties live, his BFFs, his boldy, as we'd say in Belize, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. And I just think this is kind of wonderful. You know, the Lord is fully divine, but he's also fully human, and he needs to see his friends. He sits down and has a dinner with them. Friendship is one of the great gifts under the sun. It was for Jesus, and it certainly is for us too. I think it's like the soil that we're planted in. You know, it gives us the nutrients that we need to go on. It's a great gift. And of course, you got Martha and Mary being absolutely true to form. St. John tells us that Martha goes and she starts serving dinner. She must have been the older sister, right? The responsible one. All of you older siblings out there know what that's like. And then Mary goes and gets a pound of very expensive perfume, and she lets down her long hair and she starts anointing Jesus. In Jesus' day, that would have been an incredibly scandalous thing to do. Women had to keep their hair completely veiled, hidden, and she lets it all down. It would have been like, I don't know, walking into a church wearing your clubbing attire. Something you don't do. Maybe walking into church wearing your Speedo bathing suit. Something you don't do. And you can just see Martha, you know, rolling her eyes. Probably everybody in the room is just going like, oh my goodness, what is she doing? But in any case, Judas says what they're all thinking, you know, right? He at least has that going for it. But what Mary does is an act of intimate affection, you know? Spontaneous love. It speaks to the depth of her relationship with Jesus, the depth of her friendship, that she could do something like that. And I just admire Mary's uninhibitedness. She is who she is, and she's not going to be somebody different. There's a lesson here for us, to maybe follow Mary's example a little bit more closely in our own relationships. Are there moments when we don't say what we feel? When we don't say, I love you, or I care about you, or you mean a lot to me? Particularly in moments of suffering, are we prone to withdraw from friends in the moments we love? We can't be afraid to do that. We got to be bold in our friendship and love like Mary is. I think our church also has to be a little bit more like Mary. Pope Francis famously said in 2015 when he was talking to the youth of Brazil at World Youth Day, he said, I want the church to not be afraid to get out there and make a mess. I would rather have a church that take risks of getting things wrong and making mistakes than a church that just sits up in its church all the time and is afraid to go out. The church has to be bold, has to be willing to take risks just like Mary did. So in our friendships and as a church, what are the risks of love that we're going to take during this Holy Week, during this time of quarantine when our tendency is to lock ourselves up? How are we going to love boldly?